In 1907, a family posed for a photo on Thanksgiving Day. Decades later, a detail reveals a dark secret. What if I told you that a simple family photograph taken over a century ago could hold secrets so dark that they remained hidden for decades? What if a moment meant to capture joy and gratitude instead preserved something far more sinister? In 1907, the Whitmore family gathered around their Thanksgiving table in Salem, Massachusetts, to create what should have been a treasured memory. The photograph they took that day would be passed down through generations, displayed proudly in family albums and on mantelpieces. But it wasn't until modern technology allowed us to examine the image in unprecedented detail that someone noticed something that changed everything. What you're about to hear is a story of hidden truths, family secrets, and a photograph that refuses to let the past stay buried. This is the mystery of the 1907 Thanksgiving photograph, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Before we dive into this fascinating case, if you enjoy mysteries hidden in historical photographs and unexplained stories from the past, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And I'm also developing another channel focused on Victorian-era mysteries and forgotten histories. You can find the link in the description below. The story begins not in 1907, but in the autumn of 2018. Sarah Chen, a graduate student in historical photography at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was working on her dissertation about early 20th century American family portraits. Her project involved digitizing and analyzing hundreds of photographs from the Salem Historical Society's archives. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Sarah first encountered the Whitmore family photograph. Listed simply as Thanksgiving Gathering 1907, it seemed unremarkable at first glance. The sepia-toned image showed a well-dressed family of 7 arranged around an elaborately set dining table. The composition was typical of the era, formal, staged, with everyone maintaining the rigid postures necessary for the long exposure times of early cameras. The family consisted of patriarch Charles Whitmore, a prosperous shipping merchant, his wife Elizabeth, their 4 children ranging in age from 8 to 19, and Elizabeth's elderly mother, Mrs. Adelaide Morrison. They were captured in a moment of apparent domestic bliss, the table laden with the traditional Thanksgiving feast, their faces bearing the slight, controlled smiles appropriate for formal portraiture of the period. Sarah scanned the photograph at high resolution, as she had done with hundreds of others. But when she zoomed in to examine the details of the table settings, part of her research into domestic life of the era, she noticed something odd. In the background, barely visible in the shadows beyond the dining room's archway, there appeared to be another figure. It was so faint that it could easily be dismissed as a trick of light or a flaw in the photographic plate. But Sarah's trained eye caught details that made her pause. The figure appeared to be a young woman, perhaps in her late teens or early 20s. She wore what seemed to be a maid's uniform, though it was different from the standard domestic servant attire of the period. Her face was partially obscured, but what could be seen of her expression was unsettling. While the family members all gazed at the camera with practiced formality, this hidden figure stared directly at the youngest child, 8-year-old Margaret Whitmore. Intrigued, Sarah began to dig deeper. She enhanced the image using modern software, adjusting contrast and brightness levels. What emerged made her gasp. The figure's hands, previously hidden in shadow, were now visible. They were pressed against what appeared to be glass, as if she were trapped behind an invisible barrier. And on her neck, clearly visible now, were marks that looked disturbingly like bruises in the shape of fingers. Sarah's discovery might have remained an academic curiosity, if not for what happened next. She posted the enhanced image on a historical photography forum, asking for input from other researchers. Within hours, she received a private message from someone identifying themselves only as JW. That photograph should have been destroyed, the message read. My family has spent over a century trying to forget what happened in that house. Please, for your own sake, leave this alone." But Sarah, like any dedicated researcher, couldn't let it go. She traced the photograph's provenance, discovering that it had been donated to the Historical Society in 1987 by Margaret Whitmore's grandson, who had found it among his grandmother's effects after her death. Margaret had been the last surviving member of the family in the photograph, living to the remarkable age of 89. The donation records included a note in Margaret's shaky handwriting. "The truth is in the photograph. I've carried this burden long enough. Let someone else decide what to do with it." Sarah reached out to living descendants of the Whitmore family. Most refused to speak with her, but one, Eleanor Whitmore Hayes, great-great-granddaughter of Charles Whitmore, agreed to meet. What Eleanor revealed would send Sarah down a rabbit hole of family secrets, mysterious disappearances, and a Thanksgiving dinner that marked the beginning of a series of tragedies that would haunt the Whitmore family for generations. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," Eleanor said, clutching a cup of tea in her trembling hands. "Stories about the house on Federal Street, about the things that happened there. She said the photograph was proof, but she never explained what it proved. She just said that some secrets were better left buried, and some people never really leave." Eleanor provided Sarah with access to family documents that had been kept in storage for decades. Among them were diaries, letters, and newspaper clippings that painted a picture of a family touched by tragedy and shrouded in mystery. The first clue came from a Salem newspaper dated November 30th, 1907, just 2 days after Thanksgiving. A small item on page 3 reported the disappearance of a domestic servant named Clara Hartley, who worked for a prominent Salem family. The article noted that Miss Hartley had failed to return to her boarding house after her duties on Thanksgiving Day, and that her few possessions remained unclaimed in her room. But it was Charles Whitmore's personal diary that provided the most chilling revelation. On November 28, 1907, Thanksgiving Day, he had written a single cryptic entry: "The photographer has come and gone. The family portrait is complete, but he captured more than we intended. May God forgive us for what we have done and what we must continue to do. The girl sees all but speaks nothing. In this, at least, we are fortunate." If you're finding this mystery as intriguing as I am, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me bring you more stories like this one. To understand the mystery of the photograph, we must first understand the Whitmores themselves. In 1907, they were one of Salem's most respected families, their fortune built on 3 generations of successful shipping enterprises. But beneath the veneer of respectability lay tensions and secrets that would only become apparent in hindsight. Charles Whitmore, 48 at the time of the photograph, was a man of rigid principles and exacting standards. His diary, discovered in the family archives, revealed a personality obsessed with maintaining appearances and family reputation. He wrote extensively about the importance of proper breeding and the dangers of allowing inferior blood to taint the family line. His wife, Elizabeth, came from old Boston money. Their marriage had been arranged by their families, a merger of shipping and banking interests that proved financially successful if emotionally barren. Elizabeth's letters to her sister, preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society, paint a picture of a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, finding solace only in her children and her elderly mother's company. The children were William, 19, being groomed to take over the family business, Catherine, 17, a beauty already being courted by suitable young men, James, 14, described as delicate and artistic in family letters, Margaret, 8, the baby of the family and reportedly her father's favourite, Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, Elizabeth's mother, lived with the family following her husband's death in 1905. At 72, she was described by contemporaries as sharp-witted but increasingly eccentric, given to speaking of visitors that no one else could see. The Whitmore household employed a staff of 6, a cook, 2 maids, a groundskeeper, a driver, and a governess for Margaret. It was a well-run household by all accounts, though staff turnover was notably high. The family went through 3 cooks and 5 maids between 1905 and 1907. The house itself, located on Federal Street in the historic district of Salem, was a massive Georgian colonial that had been in the Whitmore family since 1834. It boasted 18 rooms, including a ballroom, a conservatory, and what Charles euphemistically referred to in his diary as the private rooms in the basement. According to the employment records Sarah uncovered, Clara Hartley had joined the household staff in September 1907, just 2 months before her disappearance. She was 19 years old, originally from Lynn, Massachusetts, and had previously worked for a family in Boston who provided her with excellent references. What made Clara different from the previous maids was noted by several family members in their personal writings. William described her as uncommonly pretty for a servant girl, while Catherine's diary mentioned that Clara had ideas above her station and forgot her place with alarming frequency. But it was James's journal that provided the most telling insights. The 14-year-old boy wrote with a sensitivity unusual for the era. Clara is different from the others. She sees things, knows things. Yesterday I caught her staring at Father during dinner service, and there was something in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but knowledge, as if she knew secrets we had all agreed to forget. Mother noticed too. I saw her hands tremble as she lifted her soup spoon. The tension in the household appeared to escalate in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. Elizabeth's letters to her sister became more frantic. Adelaide grows worse by the day. She speaks of Clara as if the girl was someone else entirely, calling her by names I don't recognize. Yesterday, she grabbed the girl's arm and wouldn't let go, staring into her eyes and muttering in that way she has. Charles was furious. He says we must send Adelaide to the asylum in Danvers, but I cannot bear the thought. Charles's diary entries from this period are notably sparse, but one stands out. The girl knows. How she discovered it I cannot fathom, but she knows. E pleads for caution, but we cannot allow exposure. The family name must be protected at all costs. I have made inquiries. There are ways to handle such situations discreetly. What secret did Clara discover? The family documents provide hints, but no clear answers. There are references to the incident of '05 and what happened in the private rooms, but the specific details were either never written down or were deliberately destroyed. What we do know is that November 1907 was unseasonably cold, with early snow and freezing temperatures. The household account books show unusual expenses that month: extra coal for heating, new locks for the basement doors, and a payment to a Dr. Marcus Crowe, whose name appears nowhere else in the family records and who wasn't listed in any Salem medical directories of the period. The photographer hired for the Thanksgiving portrait was Josiah Pemberton, one of Salem's most respected portrait artists. His studio records, preserved in the Peabody Essex Museum, show that the Whitmore sitting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. His notes indicate nothing unusual about the session, though he did record that the family seemed uncommonly tense, and that Mrs. Whitmore the elder spoke throughout the sitting, though no one seemed to pay her any mind. Indeed, what Pemberton didn't note, or perhaps didn't see, was the figure that would only become visible when the photograph was examined over a century later. The figure that Sarah Chen had discovered. The figure that appeared to be Clara Hartley, trapped somehow in the background of the image, her hands pressed against an invisible barrier, her eyes fixed on young Margaret Whitmore with an expression of warning or accusation. November 28th, 1907, dawned grey and bitter cold in Salem. Ice crystals formed delicate patterns on the windows of the Whitmore mansion, and the harbour beyond was shrouded in freezing fog. It was not an auspicious day for celebration, but the Whitmores were determined to maintain their annual tradition. The household had been preparing for days. The cook, Mrs. O'Brien, had been working since before dawn. preparing the elaborate meal that would grace the family table. The maids, Clara Hartley, and a younger girl named Rose, had polished every surface until it gleamed and arranged chrysanthemums from the conservatory in crystal vases throughout the dining room. According to the surviving household schedules, the family's routine that day proceeded as follows. 8 a.m., family breakfast in the morning room. 10, Zaliskem, Thanksgiving service at the First Church. 12 p.m., return home for final preparations. 2 p.m., photographer's arrival for family portrait. 4 p.m., Thanksgiving dinner. But the carefully planned schedule began to unravel almost immediately. Adelaide Morrison, who had been increasingly agitated in recent days, refused to dress for church. Elizabeth's diary entry, written hastily that morning, captures the growing tension. Mother is impossible this morning. She claims Clara is not who she pretends to be and refuses to let the girl near her. She keeps speaking of the other one and saying we must let her go before it's too late. Charles is at the end of his patience. The family attended church without Adelaide, leaving her in Clara's care. What happened during those 2 hours remains a mystery, but when the family returned, they found the house in disarray. Several pieces of china had been broken in the kitchen, and Clara was discovered in Adelaide's room, holding the old woman's hands and speaking to her in low, urgent tones. Rose, the junior maid, later told investigators that she had heard strange noises coming from the basement during this time. Sounds like furniture being moved and what she described as singing but not quite right, like when you hear something underwater. Charles was furious. His diary entry, though brief, conveys his rage. Intolerable. The girl has overstepped for the last time. After the portrait, she goes. I will not have another night of this chaos under my roof. Despite the morning's disturbances, the family gathered in the dining room at 2 p.m. for their portrait. Josiah Pemberton arrived with his assistant and began setting up his equipment. The process of preparing for a photograph in 1907 was lengthy and complex, requiring precise positioning and absolute stillness during the exposure. Pemberton's assistant, a young man named Timothy Garrett, would later provide the only independent account of what happened during the session. In a letter to his sister, discovered in the Boston Public Library archives, he wrote, "The Whitmore sitting was the strangest of my career. The family arranged themselves around the table readily enough, but there was something wrong with the atmosphere. The old woman, Mrs. Morrison, kept turning to look behind her as if someone stood there. She spoke constantly, though her words made little sense. 'She's here,' she kept saying. 'She's watching. She won't let you forget.' Mr. Pemberton had to attempt the photograph 3 times. The first 2 plates were ruined when the youngest child, Margaret, suddenly cried out, claiming someone had touched her shoulder. The 3rd attempt succeeded, but I swear I felt a coldness in the room that had nothing to do with the November weather. And just as the exposure finished, I thought I saw, but no, it must have been a trick of the light. What Timothy thought he saw, he never specified. But when the photograph was developed days later, Pemberton noted in his records that there was an anomaly in the background that he attributed to a flaw in the photographic plate. He offered to retake the portrait, but Charles Whitmore declined, paying the full fee and collecting the photograph without complaint. The Thanksgiving dinner that followed the photography session was, by all accounts, a disaster. Mrs. O'Brien later told neighbors that she had never seen the family in such a state. The carefully prepared meal went largely uneaten. Adelaide refused to sit at the table, instead pacing the dining room and speaking to empty air. Elizabeth wept openly. The children sat in terrified silence, and Clara Hartley was nowhere to be found. Leave a comment below about what you think happened to Clara. Your theories might help piece together this mystery. According to the police report filed 2 days later, Clara was last seen by Rose at approximately 3:30 p.m., just after the photography session concluded. She had been instructed by Charles to attend to something in the basement. Unusual, as the basement was typically off-limits to the female staff. Rose reported that Clara had seemed different when she received these instructions. She looked at Mr. Whitmore with such a strange expression, Rose told investigators, not afraid exactly, more like resigned, like she knew something the rest of us didn't. At 4 p.m., when Clara failed to appear to help serve dinner, Elizabeth sent Rose to find her. The girl searched the house, but found no trace of the missing maid. The basement door was locked from the outside, with no response to her knocking. When she reported this to Charles, he told her curtly that Clara had departed on urgent family business and would not be returning. But the household staff knew this was impossible. Clara's few possessions remained in her attic room, including her coat and the small amount of money she had saved. No one leaves for a family emergency in freezing weather without their coat. As night fell on that Thanksgiving Day, the Whitmore house was in chaos. Adelaide had to be sedated by the hastily summoned Dr. Crow. The children were sent to their rooms, and Charles and Elizabeth held a heated conversation behind the closed doors of his study, their raised voices audible throughout the house, though the words remained indistinct. It was young Margaret who would later provide the most chilling account of that night. In a memoir written decades later, she recalled, "I couldn't sleep after the terrible dinner. I lay in my bed, listening to the house settling around me, when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured steps that stopped right outside my door. I waited for the knock for someone to enter, but nothing happened. Then I heard a voice, soft and sad. 'Remember me, little one. Remember what you saw.' I recognized Clara's voice, but how could it be? Father had said she left. I crept to the door and opened it a crack. The hallway was empty, but there was a coldness in the air, and a smell like old roses and something else, something metallic and wrong. I never told anyone what I saw that night. Who would believe a child? But I knew Clara hadn't left. I knew she was still in the house somewhere, and sometimes on cold November nights I still hear those footsteps, still smell those roses mixed with copper, still hear her voice asking me to remember." The official investigation into Clara Hartley's disappearance began on November 30th, 1907, when her landlady, Mrs. Patricia Donnelly, reported her missing to the Salem Police Department. The case was assigned to Detective Inspector Robert Mansfield, a thorough if unimaginative investigator who had served on the force for 15 years. Mansfield's notes, preserved in the Salem Police Archives, provide a frustrating glimpse into an investigation that seemed doomed from the start. His first entry reads, "Called to Whitmore Residence, Federal Street, regarding missing domestic servant. Family claims girl left suddenly due to family emergency. No forwarding address provided. Suspicious circumstances, but family highly respected. Must proceed with caution." The detective's interviews with the Whitmore family yielded little information. Charles maintained that Clara had received word of a sick relative and had departed immediately, though he could provide no details about which relative or where she had gone. Elizabeth corroborated her husband's story, but seemed, according to Mansfield's notes, extremely nervous and prone to tears. The children were deemed too upset by the departure of a favoured servant to be interviewed thoroughly. Adelaide Morrison was declared non compos mentis by Dr. Crow and therefore unable to provide testimony. It was the servants who provided the most interesting, if confusing, information. Mrs. O'Brien, the cook, told Mansfield, "That girl was trouble from the start, I said so. Always poking around where she shouldn't, asking questions about the family, and the way she looked at Mr. Charles, bold as brass, that one. But she was kind to the children, I'll give her that, especially little Margaret. Used to sing to her, old songs I'd never heard before." Rose, the junior maid, was more specific about the strange occurrences leading up to Clara's disappearance. "The house changed when she arrived, Inspector. Doors would open by themselves. We'd hear footsteps in empty rooms, and the basement. None of us would go down there alone anymore. Clara said she felt them watching. When I asked who them was, she just shook her head. The groundskeeper, Thomas McCarthy, provided perhaps the most intriguing testimony. I saw Miss Clara in the garden the morning of Thanksgiving. She was standing by the old well, the one that's been sealed since before the Whitmores bought the place. She had something in her hands, looked like papers or letters. When she saw me watching, she quickly hid them in her apron. Looked right scared, she did. Mansfield attempted to search the Whitmore house, but Charles limited his access, citing privacy concerns and the upset it would cause his family. The detective was allowed to examine Clara's room and the main floors, but was denied access to the basement, which Charles claimed was under renovation and unsafe. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Mansfield discovered that Dr. Marcus Crowe, who had been treating Adelaide Morrison, was not registered with the Massachusetts Medical Board. Further inquiries revealed that no physician by that name had ever practiced in Salem or the surrounding areas. When confronted with this information, Charles claimed there had been a misunderstanding. The doctor was actually Dr. Marcus Crown from Boston. However, no such physician could be located there either. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the mystery, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more historical mysteries. As the investigation continued, strange incidents began to plague the Whitmore household. Servants reported unexplained cold spots throughout the house, the sound of a woman singing late at night, objects moving on their own, the persistent smell of roses in the dead of winter shadows moving in peripheral vision. Within 6 months of Clara's disappearance, the entire household staff, except for Thomas McCarthy, had quit. The Whitmores found it increasingly difficult to hire replacements, as word of the haunted mansion spread through Salem's servant community. The family itself was not immune to the strangeness. William, the eldest son, began suffering from terrible nightmares. He would wake screaming about the woman in the walls and the blood on the roses. Catherine became withdrawn and refused to enter certain rooms of the house. James documented increasingly bizarre occurrences in his journal. She's still here. I know it. Last night, I saw her reflection in the mirror in the hallway, just for a moment. She was trying to tell me something, her mouth moving urgently, but no sound came through. When I turned, there was nothing there, but on the mirror, written in the condensation from my breath, were the words, "Look down." It was Margaret, however, who seemed most affected. The 8-year-old began speaking to invisible companions, carrying on full conversations with empty air. When asked whom she was talking to, she would simply say, "Clara's teaching me songs." The photograph taken on Thanksgiving Day arrived from Pemberton's studio in early December. The family's reaction to it was telling. Elizabeth burst into tears upon seeing it. Charles immediately ordered it to be put away, declaring it a failed likeness. But Margaret begged to keep it, saying it was the only way to remember. Adelaide Morrison's condition deteriorated rapidly after Thanksgiving. She spent her days calling for Clara, insisting the girl was trapped and needed help. Her ravings became so disturbing that Charles finally had her committed to the Danvers State Hospital in January 1908. She died there 3 months later, reportedly calling Clara's name until the end. The investigation officially concluded in March 1908 with the designation missing person, presumed voluntary departure. Detective Mansfield's final report included a curious addendum. While no evidence of foul play has been discovered, this investigator notes several irregularities in the case that remain unexplained. The complete absence of any trace of Miss Hartley after November 28, 1907, is highly unusual. Furthermore, the Whitmore family's behavior throughout the investigation has been evasive and contradictory. However, without concrete evidence, and given the family's standing in the community, no further action is recommended. But the mystery was far from over. In 1910, during renovations to the Whitmore House following a minor fire, workers made a disturbing discovery. Behind a newly opened wall in the basement, they found women's clothing, a maid's uniform, torn and stained with what appeared to be blood. The clothing was identified by former servants as belonging to Clara Hartley. Charles Whitmore claimed the clothing must have been left by a previous servant, and the stains were simply rust from old pipes. The police, showing a deference to the wealthy family that would be unthinkable today, accepted this explanation without further investigation. The Whitmore family's fortunes began to decline after 1907. The shipping business struggled. William died in a sailing accident in 1912. Catherine's engagement was broken off when her fiancé's family heard rumors about the house. James left for Europe in 1914 and never returned, dying in France during the Great War. By 1920, only Charles, Elizabeth, and Margaret remained in the massive house on Federal Street. Charles suffered a stroke in 1923 that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak. Elizabeth cared for him until his death in 1925, after which she sold the house and moved to a small apartment in Boston, where she lived quietly until her death in 1934. Margaret, the sole survivor who had been in the photograph, never married. She worked as a teacher in Boston and rarely spoke of her childhood, but she kept the Thanksgiving photograph all her life, and according to her students, she would sometimes be found staring at it with tears in her eyes. When Sarah Chen made her discovery in 2018, she had access to technology that Detective Mansfield could never have imagined. Digital enhancement, spectral analysis, and other modern techniques revealed details in the photograph that had been invisible to earlier observers. The figure in the background, the one pressing against the invisible barrier, was definitely Clara Hartley. Comparison with the only other known photograph of Clara from her previous employer's family album confirmed the match through facial recognition software, but it was the details revealed by enhancement that proved most disturbing. The marks on her neck were clearly visible and consistent with manual strangulation. Her hands showed what appeared to be defensive wounds. Most chilling of all, careful analysis of her eyes revealed that her pupils were fixed and dilated, a sign that she was already dead when the photograph was taken. But how could a dead woman appear in a photograph? And why was she visible only in the background, like a reflection or a double exposure? Sarah consulted with photography experts who ruled out double exposure or photographic trickery. The image was genuine, captured in a single exposure. One expert, Dr. Michael Thornton from the Getty Museum, offered a theory. In the early days of photography, there were many reports of extras, figures appearing in photographs who weren't visible to the naked eye during the sitting. Most can be explained by reflections, shadows, or pareidolia. But this image, the detail is too precise, too deliberate. It's as if she was there, but not there. Present, but on a different plane of existence. Bricky. Sarah's research also uncovered information about the house itself. The mansion on Federal Street had been built on the site of a much older structure, a house that had been burned during the Salem witch trials of 1692. The original owner, a woman named Constance Hartley, had been accused of witchcraft and died in prison awaiting trial. The connection to Clara's surname couldn't be coincidental. Genealogical research revealed that Clara was indeed a direct descendant of Constance Hartley, a fact that she might have discovered while working in the Whitmore house with its extensive library of local history. The basement where Clara was last seen had been part of the original 17th century structure. The private rooms that Charles mentioned in his diary were built around the old foundation, incorporating elements of the original house, including what appeared to be a ritual chamber. Modern ground-penetrating radar examination of the property, conducted in 2019 with the current owner's permission, revealed anomalies beneath the basement floor. There appeared to be a sealed chamber or void space approximately 6 feet below the current foundation. The current owners declined permission for excavation, citing structural concerns. But it was the analysis of Adelaide Morrison's medical records from Danvers State Hospital that provided the most intriguing clues. Her attending physician had documented her ravings in unusual detail. Among her repeated statements, "She's in the between place, neither here nor there." The blood sealed it, but the camera caught her trying to break through. "They took her body but couldn't take her soul. She's stuck in the moment forever Thanksgiving. The children will carry her with them." She marked them all, especially the little one. Adelaide also drew obsessively during her confinement. Her drawings, preserved in the hospital archives, show the same scene over and over: a circular chamber with symbols on the walls, a figure lying in the center, and shadows gathering around her. Sarah tracked down Margaret Whitmore's personal effects after her death in 1987. Among them was a journal she had kept sporadically throughout her life. The entries related to Clara were deeply disturbing. 1925. Father died today. At the end, he could only move his eyes, but I saw the terror in them. He kept looking at the corner of the room, tracking something invisible moving closer. I knew who he saw. 1943. I dream of her still. She stands at the foot of my bed, young as ever while I grow old. She doesn't speak anymore, just watches. Waiting. For what? 1976. Saw the photograph in a book about Salem history. They cropped it to show just the family, cutting out the background. If only it were that easy to cut out the past. 1985. I'm the last one now, the last who remembers. Sometimes I think about telling someone, but who would believe me? That we killed her because she knew our secret, that Father and his associates practiced things that should have died with the witch trials, that Clara discovered the truth about the private rooms and what happened there, that the photograph captured her soul trying to escape the prison we made for her. But Margaret never specified what the family secret was. References to the ceremonies, the offerings, and what Father's group required appear throughout family documents, but the exact nature of these activities remains unclear. Sarah's investigation attracted attention from paranormal researchers, historians, and descendants of other Salem families from that era. Several claimed their own families had stories about the Whitmores and their associates, stories of secret societies, occult practices, and deals made with forces beyond human understanding. One researcher, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwood, no relation, who specialized in early American occult history, provided context. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw a revival of interest in occultism among the American upper class. Groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn had chapters in major cities. Some wealthy families, particularly in New England, with its history of witch trials and supernatural folklore, formed their own societies. They believed they could harness ancient powers for material gain. The cost of such dabbling was often higher than they anticipated. The photograph continues to defy explanation. Modern analysis has revealed even more anomalies. Temperature readings of the original photograph show it's consistently 3 to 5 degrees colder than its surroundings. Multiple people have reported feeling watched when alone with the image. Electromagnetic field detectors show unusual spikes near the photograph. Several digital copies have allegedly corrupted in ways that reveal the hidden figure more clearly. In 2020, a team of paranormal investigators received permission to spend a night in the former Whitmore mansion, now converted to apartments. Their equipment recorded numerous anomalies in the basement area, including EVP, electronic voice phenomena, of a woman singing, thermal images showing a human-shaped cold spot, unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations, motion sensors triggering in empty rooms. One investigator claimed to have photographed a figure matching Clara's description standing at the top of the basement stairs. However, skeptics point out that pareidolia and suggestion could account for these findings, and so the mystery remains. Was Clara Hartley murdered by the Whitmore family to protect some dark secret? Did the photograph somehow capture her spirit at the moment of transition? Or is there a rational explanation we simply haven't discovered yet? What we know for certain is that a young woman disappeared on Thanksgiving Day 1907, and her image appeared in a photograph where she couldn't possibly have been. We know the Whitmore family was involved in something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. We know that everyone who was in that photograph met tragic ends, as if marked by some terrible curse. The photograph itself resides now in a climate-controlled vault at the Salem Historical Society. Viewing is by appointment only, and staff report that many researchers have difficulty spending extended time with the image. Some describe feeling an overwhelming sadness, others a sense of being watched. A few have claimed to see the figure in the background move, though this has never been captured on video. What do you think happened to Clara Hartley? Was she a victim of murder, her spirit somehow trapped in the photograph? Was she involved in something supernatural herself, given her family connection to the Salem witch trials? Or is there a logical explanation we're missing? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. If this deep dive into one of photography's most enduring mysteries has captivated you, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me research and share more incredible stories from history's hidden corners. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. I have so many more mysteries to share with you, from unexplained disappearances to impossible photographs, from historical enigmas to modern-day puzzles. Every week, we'll explore another story that challenges what we think we know about the world. Remember, some photographs capture more than just a moment in time. Sometimes they capture secrets that were meant to stay buried. Sometimes they reveal truths that someone desperately wanted to hide. And sometimes, just sometimes, they show us that the past is never quite as gone as we might hope. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and remember, the truth is often hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to look close enough to see it. Thank you for watching. End screen with subscribe button.